Hey everybody, Rick here. Happy New Year to everybody. I am starting off the year with a special guest and it's already so weird. I'm weirdly reminded of being like 10 years old and playing piano and being able to play to my heart's content when I'm alone. But then the minute someone's watching me do it, I just want to curl up inside of myself and just die. But
okay,
that's
this is going well.
That's not exactly what's happening.
This is gonna be great.
I love that you're here, but also I hate it.
Okay.
But I love it.
Cool. So.
So this is my wife, Jackie, everybody.
Hi.
And we decided to read The Dutch House by Anne Patchett over the holiday break. So we thought if we read the book together, we might as well talk about it on camera together. So I feel like this video is going to be so long already. Let's just jump into the actual book because I feel like we're going to be able to talk about this for like hours. In terms of what the book is about, for anybody who hasn't read it, so it's kind of one of these family saga books that focuses on Danny and Maeve Conroy. When Danny is 3 and Maeve is 10, their mother decides to leave and she moves to India and kind of abandons their family because they live in the titular Dutch house in the story, and the wealth and the opulence of that lifestyle really bothered their mother, so she kind of abandons the family and just moves away. So it's about them growing up in this Dutch house and what the Dutch house ends up meaning to them. And if you fast forward like 12 years from when she leaves, their father, Cyril, ends up dying. So Andrew, their stepmother, kind of takes hold of the house, kicks them out, and the majority of the book is them kind of dealing with life after they've been kicked out of the house and what that means to them, and them kind of reminiscing and looking back constantly over their life, missing this house, missing their family, and what it all meant for them. The last third is when everything starts to hit home, and I mean more especially like when their mother comes back into the picture. So she's away, I think, for like 40 years. They find out that she's actually living in New York and she's around, and they reconnect with her. So like by the time that happens, I feel like the first 2/3 of the book are just setting the foundation for how everyone will feel about that moment.
Yeah.
And then everything falls into place as a result of her coming back into their life.
Yeah.
I think this is an interesting book for us to talk about because we both have kind of deep-seated parental issues in very different ways. So the fact that we read this book and wanted to talk about it, and it's very much about like old wounds, and it's really wrapped up in parenting and parenting styles and decisions. So yeah, I honestly like wasn't sure how you were going to feel about that part of the book. So that's what I'm most excited to talk to you about.
Well, should I give them some background on my...
Whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, so my mom passed away when I was 19. And so, you know, obviously my mother's absence is just permanent. So for me, mentally, in this book, having the mother gone forever was just as potent for me because I personally understand that more.
Right.
So, but having her come back, I reached a point in the book where I was like bummed out, and not just like in a way where I felt bad for the kids, but I was like angry at the mom. You know, Danny is telling the story.
Yeah.
And so I really felt that part of his anger.
I think we'll get into, I want to talk about Danny being the narrator in a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a really interesting choice. His anger at her is I feel like that's the most interesting part of the book, and his journey towards forgiving her or not forgiving her, I think was the most important moment of the book. I think that's the most important theme of the book. Danny harbors a lot more anger towards her than Maeve does. Maeve really misses having their mother around.
Yeah.
And as a result, when she comes back, Danny's really pissed about everything. And Maeve just wants to spend time with her and just wants to have this loving, close relationship with her again because she's spent 40 years missing her. There's kind of two schools of thought where you spend 40 years missing a person. When they come back, do you just enjoy the time you have with them and choose to forgive them? Or... And I think this is like Celeste has a conversation with Danny at one point where he can't forgive her, and she is saying, you feel the need to continue to be mad at her, like forgiving her kind of lets her off the hook. She says, that's what you're afraid of, that your mother won't be punished. I love the juxtaposition between feeling like you need to punish someone for something that they did to you that hurt you, or choosing to forgive and just accepting what happened and choosing to be happy with them. And that's the parental thing that I have, because I have I've talked to them a little bit on the channel before, like some pretty deep-seated issues with my dad and stuff that he's done and not done over the last 30 years of my life. And I've had really hard moments where like I want to love my dad as much as I can, and I want to forgive him for things that he's done so that our relationship can be as strong as it can moving forward. But by doing that, do you just let him get off the hook for all the things that hurt you? And I'm going to struggle with that, I think, for the rest of my life, probably, because I feel both of them and I don't know if one is right or wrong. I want to be the forgiving person, but I also, there's a part of you that just weirdly holds on to, and I think this is the point that she's actually made in the book, there's a part of you that holds on to suffering, and there's like weird cheap fuel that people can get from their own suffering, and you kind of get addicted to it. And I think that's like a huge theme of the book, like choosing to stay within your own suffering rather than persevere and move on through it. I said a lot there, sorry.
So I agree. So just going back to the forgiveness piece, I think, yeah, you're right. That idea of how complex forgiveness is for people, and that it almost gets to a point where you have to recognize that by forgiving them doesn't condone their behavior.
Right.
So it then shifts the focus from making whatever happened okay to you letting it go. And you're not carrying that as much.
So she felt, we haven't really talked about the house at all, and the house is such a huge part of this book, because it really kind of came to symbolize, basically they get the house because there's this rich Dutch family in the town who went bankrupt, and their father was kind of able to swoop in. He's a big kind of real estate guy, and he swoops in during like an estate sale and ends up buying the house. So the house is kind of this symbol of wealth and opulence in the town, and then they grow up living there and kind of become accustomed to this life of wealth and privilege. She, Elna, didn't come from that. So her being in the house, and she has servants and people who kind of take care of things for her. She's really uncomfortable with all of it, to the point where she leaves her family and she moves to India to kind of take care of the poor, basically, to take money from the rich and give it to the poor. And she spends like decades doing that. So it's funny because like you're really mad at what she did to their family, but it's really like, how mad can you be at someone who sacrificed their entire life to help other people?
I really felt like the house and the character, if you will, of the house was so weirdly distracting for me.
Okay.
Like, in this way that I think that was the first thing I really heard about the book, was the house is a character and you're really gonna like that.
That's like the worst phrase anyone uses about any, like the whole, like the town is a character, I can't stand that when people talk about books.
I do understand what they meant in that, of course, it's this powerful backdrop of a setting that weirdly determined a lot of each character's motivations and their decisions.
Yeah.
And like you just said, the mother leaving because she's clearly didn't want to perpetuate that type of lifestyle.
Right.
Because it just did not line up with her, was really, really fascinating to me, because I find that the female energy, it's really tied to domesticity.
Right.
So when the feminine energy doesn't want to go there, what does that mean? And we kind of saw that play out in this story.
You bringing up the feminine energy, that's interesting, because when I was thinking about why Danny is the narrator of the book, Because I always find it interesting when women write main characters who are men, or men who write main characters that are women. I think it's always like a very specific choice to do that, and they're doing that for a reason. So while I'm reading a book, I'm wondering, like, why did they choose to do it this way, and why did Anne Patchett decide to have Danny as the narrator of this story? And what I thought was really interesting, and I didn't really notice it at the start, but by the end it really kind of became clear. Almost everyone around him in this book is a woman, and he's this guy he becomes a doctor, but he's kind of a bit of an oblivious person. I think he talks about it a little bit in the book, how he was so unaware of what was happening. He's a man who was kind of held up by all these women in his life, and he's not aware of it for most of the story, which is like the case for so many men in the world. I feel like men get to ride on whatever wave they're riding, and they're able to do that because of all of these strong and loving and important women in their life, that they're not acknowledging the help that they get from all these women. And yeah, it's totally a privilege that men enjoy, and most men are not aware of it at all. Danny was not aware of it, I think, at all. I think that's a point that she's making. Whether she wanted to or not, it's there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I don't think I even was fully aware of that until you just said it, but it's kind of true. And just watching the difference between his path to like a more disciplined life through med school, we kind of saw him quasi-resent it because it was also tied to his inheritance.
Well, yeah, he's also gifted the money to go and be a doctor, and Maeve is not given that money to go and do whatever. She's already done schooling, so she doesn't get to even use the inheritance to become something else.
Right.
So like he also enjoys that privilege as a man, where she does not. I listened to the book on audiobook. Huge recommendation, by the way. Tom Hanks reads the book, and he's arguably the best narrator I've ever heard. Listening to the book on audiobook, I find, I mean, most people out there will know, like if you audiobook a book, you don't experience it in the same way. And I find like all the major stuff you can pick up on, but a lot of the little minor things you can kind of float through and not even realize they're going on. And I feel like Cyril was one of those like losses in the book for me, where he wasn't a big enough figure that I feel like I could speak to anything about him.
I don't know. I think reading the book, he was a bit bigger for me. Yeah. I didn't really see that he was floating around in as much as the kids were very focused on him and wanted attention from him.
That's funny. I didn't get that at all.
Yeah.
Maybe it was me. Maybe I was so focused on the mother narrative and their feelings around that I wasn't even paying attention to it.
They learned the language of the father, which is like, you don't necessarily run up to him and jump all over him and, create a spectacle. It was very like, there's one part where Maeve specifically, like when they go to visit Maeve in New York, I think it is.
Yep.
And so she had accomplished all this stuff at school, and she wants her dad to see it, and it was one of the rare exchanges you see between them where she actually has his full attention. And I think you see how much she just craved it from her parents in general. Like, she wasn't parented in many ways. She sort
weird
of
how that stuck out for you more than
she
me. It's weird, huh?
She becomes the parent in a lot of ways in this book. So
she said similar things with her dad.
Yeah. Yeah, but I don't think that's rare. It's just so universal. A lot of the stuff she's talking about here is
another thing
energetically heavy.
Yeah, another thing we both share here is having stepmothers.
Yes.
And Andrea is a very big part of the book. And I thought it was really interesting because I feel like Andrea makes the whole book give it this like quasi-gothic fairy tale kind of vibe, where they're literally like these like almost Hansel and Gretel characters. The mother is gone. The evil stepmother kind of comes in and she kind of takes the Dutch house from them. She inherits it and she kicks them out. Or that's how I saw her while I experienced the book. But I've seen a couple people talk about the book after and just talking about, or like ruminating on the idea that Danny is telling this story. So he is telling it from this very biased point of view. And that's how he sees her. Yep. But like, is he just seeing her as this evil stepmother character when in reality, she's probably a much more fully developed person. I didn't feel like that at all when I listened to it. Like, I didn't see almost anything redeeming in Andrea, but other people seem to have. So I thought that might have been one of the things that I just missed out on.
And this is what I mean when I'm saying that the author is being so generous to each character, because she incorporates that last bit with Andrea and the mom.
Yeah.
Like, the mom is nursing her, and you see how fragile, I guess, for lack of a better word, Andrea actually is. And she takes a more selfish path, I would say, that makes her more unredeeming.
The part about Elna becoming kind of a nurse to her later in life was fascinating to me, because she especially said, like, I think it's Danny who confronts her about it at one point, being like, why are you doing, like, how are you doing this? How are you forgiving this woman? And Elna says, you serve the people who need it. You don't serve the people who make you feel the best about yourself. That was one of the more powerful things in the whole book.
Well, and how she got to that point, the mother, we don't know, because realistically, there is a self-sacrificial element that's expected of, again, sort of the more feminine energy in the house. Yeah. And Elna's character had that in spades, but in very sort of unconventional ways.
Right.
And so you see she's almost this like martyr level giver and helper, and yet she runs away from her family and has this huge shame and burden, which you wonder if that feeds it throughout her life, which I think it must have.
Well, I love that you just used the word martyr, because at one point, I don't know if it's Celeste or maybe it's Sandy. I think Sandy ends up calling her a saint, or comparing her to a saint. Mm-hmm. So Sandy was one of the maids in the house, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, she basically like compares her to a saint, and Danny's like, well, she left her family. What are you talking about? And then he has this realization that like saints are typically hated by their families, because what makes you a saint is basically sacrificing yourself to the people you love to serve other people. Yeah. Which I thought was so interesting, like, and just like such a recoloring of these kind of more famous people that you have in your mind when you think of people who are famous givers or saints or whatever. Like, you see their persona and how it's applied to the world, but how did that apply to the people that love them the most, who didn't get enough from them? I thought that was so interesting.
Yeah, and I think there is probably a progression of martyrs in that they do it initially because it does help them feel good about themselves. So there is a selfish aspect to it. But when we see Elna and when she speaks to it, she's coming at it from a later point in her life. And it seems like she's moved to that other place of like understanding what it really means.
Right.
Is that it's not glamorous anymore for her. They talk a lot about her lice and stuff like that, and how she had to cut her hair.
Right.
And so there's all these levels of sacrifice she had to really make to be that person in the world. And so I think that's why she had this easier time of addressing the house in the end with the kids.
Yeah.
Than maybe even if Cyril was there, the dad, he may have just kept avoiding and compartmentalizing, which I found was very much his way of maintaining life.
I feel like the book doesn't kind of come to easy answers for you, or like Patchett doesn't come in as this like authorial voice and say, this is how I feel about this, or this is how you should feel, or this is what you should take away. It's very much just kind of laying out these nuanced things in front of you, and you get to decide how you feel and who you forgive and who you don't.
I was really kind of struck by how different the idea of the absence of the mother, and knowing that she chose that versus like dying per se, as like not being a choice to leave your kids, but she chose to leave children. Kind of watching that unfold, especially in Maeve's life, and how she kind of, well, and Danny's as well, but how they had to piece together maternal figures with like the caregivers and the nanny. So you kind of watch like that dynamic happen as well, where maybe the kids were able to sort of welcome their mother back a little bit more because of the other maternal influences they had growing up, versus if they didn't have that at all, like if they were just sort of stuck with Andrea and her hatred for them or whatever it was. It's like, it was very purposeful. And Patchett's,
that's her name.
Yeah, okay. I've been avoiding it.
I should have lied and said a fake name. And Packer.
But like just having her incorporate that, because I think through my own experience, like that's partially, I think even unconsciously, what you end up doing is when there's the absence of any parent, but especially sort of the maternal energy, you piece it together through other people, and it's never complete, but you still need it. It's not like the absence just, rids you of wanting that in your life. So.
Right. I find it really funny. We've gotten this far into it, and we basically have not talked about the house almost the thing.
I was just gonna bring it back to the house, because your whole point around it being almost like gothic and fairy tale like, it's true. I actually maybe haven't explored the house as much as I should have, because they talk a lot about I think it's I'm gonna butcher it, Delft.
What are we talking about?
Well, okay, hold on. Can I just Google while I'm on this thing?
Googling is great content during videos. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah, just wait around while I Google things.
I'm not going to edit this out at all either.
Please edit this. Delft? But he's talking about it like it's like tiles. Yeah, so you've seen, okay, maybe Rick will place
Maybe
it.
I'll put something here.
Yeah, it's the Delft tile work or stonework or whatever he refers to in the book, that's typically around the fireplace mantles. And I knew exactly what he was talking about. It's that blue and white, very I guess Dutch style of imagery, and it's typically kind of nautical. It's those little accents. And then of course there's these big portraits of these previous owners everywhere, which kind of holds this
the Van
weight.
Beeks,
Yeah, this weight of like, what was their life like? And it's a very historically concrete spot in the town, but it doesn't necessarily reflect the town. Maybe it could speak to part of like the immigrant experience of like creating and taking your homeland with you and putting it back into like wherever you are, and integrating it into that space. So
side note, Jackie is studying to be an interior designer, so this stuff is really interesting to her. Not that it's not to me. I'm just saying, I'm just laughing that like I wouldn't have remotely thought to talk about this, and you are, which is cute.
Yeah, well, it's it's these little mentions of, I don't think she overly develops the space because she wants it to be more reflective of the characters, I think, and their experience of it. But, she talks a lot about it being cold.
But I've actually seen her talk about purposely not describing the house in super detail, because she's saying the Dutch house is a rich person's house, but everyone's opinion of what a rich person's house is different. So basically she's like, I wanted to give you enough information to give you a vibe, but you build it in your head.
So on the cover of the book, there's the portrait of Maeve, which I will pretend like it's right here.
Imagine if I didn't put anything there. I'm just like, a Christmas tree. So yeah, it's the portrait of Maeve on the front,
And I love that image. I love the cover of this book.
That's also why she didn't put the house on the cover too.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's the whole thing. I didn't want to give you a vision of what the house was. You get to build it yourself.
So fitting. Yeah. Well, and that portrait just ended up holding bigger stuff,
Yeah.
I think, and oops, and oops.
You're done. Okay, this is okay.
Can you move it here? Thanks. So anyways, the portrait, and just like they're rich enough to have portraits done
Right.
of themselves. So it's just like there's these very creative ways of speaking to the wealth that, you're right, don't necessarily talk specifically about how
Right.
rich these spaces.
I was
You do get that vibe.
I was just reading a book, Writers and Lovers by Lily King, and she's talking, the main character in the book is spent 6 years writing a book, and she's just finishing it. She finally gets an agent, and the agent is reading over the book, and she says, like, she's kind of flagging things like, change this, I love this, whatever. And one of the notes that she makes is, you're telling us how this person feels here. Show us how this person feels here, because emotions are felt in your body. So it's one of those things where, like, that's the more interesting way to write about that thing. And I feel like that's a more interesting way to write about wealth. Don't just tell us they're rich, like, show us how they're rich and how that affects their life.
Okay, so if the house is truly sort of a character in this story, you sort of see the house come into its own as well by the end.
Well, that's interesting.
Because you see
the character arc of the house.
Hey,
that's real,
it's
actually.
real.
That's interesting.
No, it is true. So my interpretation of it is that the way... Oh, you're done.
I'm done.
You know, they talk about the warmth of the house by the end, and that it sort of becomes like a home versus a house.
Right. Oh, I feel like such an idiot for not seeing that before. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. And then it reminded me of that quote. That quote.
That
everyone
old quote.
knows.
I don't know what you're talking about at all.
Well, I just read it in my last semester in one of my books. And it was from Winston Churchill, of all people.
Okay.
Who says, we shape our buildings, therefore they shape us. And so it kind of talks a little bit more about, like, we don't just exist in these places, we live in these places.
Here's a question for you. Would you have considered the house as much as you have if the book was not called The Dutch House?
Yeah, I mean, the cover's beautiful, so if I'd seen the cover, I may have bought it.
Well, that's neat, but also that's not the question I asked you.
What did you ask? What?
I said, how would you have felt about the house and, like, its thematic place in the story if it wasn't called The Dutch House? Would you have focused on it in the story? Not would you have bought it, you weirdo.
I'm not listening. This has gone on for too long.
Okay, we don't want to see the back of your head. No, like, if she didn't call it The Dutch House, would The Dutch House been such a character in the story for you? Where she's, like, focusing you on the house as you started. If it wasn't called that, would you have noticed how big a deal the house plays in the story? Or would you just focus on the wealth rather than the house? Would you just focus on the mother leaving rather than the house making her leave? Like, you know what I mean? Like, would it have...
Right.
Because I think it would have not been as prominent for me.
I agree.
Which is so interesting. Like, to me, is like making books and publishing books and stuff. That's such an interesting choice. Where a title to me is usually what, like, makes you pick a book up, but it often isn't so important to your experience of that story.
Well, so my whole thing around this is that I'm used to buildings and towns and all that kind of stuff just being the setting.
Right.
It's not necessarily a character, but of course it is in its own right, and I think it is in more narratives than we think it is.
I love that you've convinced me that it is a character in the book, but I also hate it. I just hate that idea because it sounds so just like university first English class.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
I think the main character was the house. Like, but it's true though. It's like it was such a, like, the fact that there is a weird growth arc to the house makes that argument stronger for me.
What was the question again?
I think we're at the end of this thing.
We're good at this.
Mostly because, like, here's what you're giving to the book. What? What? Why do we do it?
I'm not used to being on camera.
Okay. Well, you did fine for the first 55 minutes, and then you just...
Well, you're also sitting... He's sitting behind me, so...
I've told you before we
start... I'm trying to get closer to you guys, and Rick's like, go away, far away. We're fighting now.
This is those irreconcilable differences you hear about. The Maeve protectiveness thing, that's something I did want to talk about. Because I found the dynamic between Maeve and Celeste, Danny's wife, really interesting. Where, like, he brings up a couple times that actually, like, Celeste and Maeve kind of hit it off first as friends. And then eventually, as he started dating Celeste, Maeve had a bigger problem with Celeste. Like, they got along less and less over time. And he's kind of saying, like, if I was never in the picture, I think these two would have been great friends. But I was, so they kind of hated each other over me.
Maybe she's making a comment about Danny not fully growing up.
That's interesting. What do you mean?
Just in that way where he doesn't ever let his significant other become that person for him. And I think Celeste is very resentful of that she doesn't get to...
That she's not more important to him?
Yeah, or I don't know, maybe feel that feminine energy that he needs. And she recognizes that her partner needs that, but, like, she isn't that person for him.
Like, it's so purposeful, the dynamic between the two. And I'm wondering if Maeve, she seemed to have been thinking the most over what she's lost.
Yeah.
She really misses the house way more than Danny did. She really misses their mother more than Danny did. And I feel like when Danny started, like, she's focused on what's been taken away from her. And I wonder if she saw Celeste as someone who's taking Danny away from her. Yeah,
like, I think each character has their own needs that aren't quite met. You know, as much as there are defining people in our lives that hold space and characteristics and roles for us, there's also spaces that don't hold anything. And so I think, you know, these two very prominent women in Danny's life, his wife and his sister, like, he is ultimately kind of this combination of their influences and their support. He even talks about when, like, he was kind of picking Celeste to be his partner, that she didn't interfere. Like, that was a big draw for him.
Right.
Which I found very interesting.
Didn't interfere in what way? Like,
well, she allowed for him to be distracted constantly by other things. And then when that dynamic continued throughout their relationship, she grew tired of it.
He's choosing like a long-term partner based on what he wants and less on what he needs, I think.
Yeah.
Like, in the long run. Which is, like, such a male thing to do.
I didn't really think about that, but yeah, that was a really big tension in the book. I think she kept wanting Danny to not need Maeve.
Celeste is like, this is a book I for sure will reread. Like, especially having listened to it on audio, I'm very, very excited to read the actual book because, like, Celeste is one of those people where, like, I'm bad for this anyway. Like, when I'm reading a book, I'm too susceptible to the main character's biases. Like, I don't think Danny is a reliable narrator at all. But I find every narrator for me is more reliable than they should be the first time I read a book. I'm too much on their side, especially this being a first person from Danny's perspective. It's like Danny's voice is literally in my head as I'm listening to the story. I'm just like, I was with him for so much of the story before I realized, like, I should have been questioning a lot of the things he's saying and doing. And Celeste is a character that I would love to pay more attention to the second time around. Like, she's his ex-wife. Like, he's looking at her in an unfair way, I think. That's why I love rereading.
Yeah.
Like, I've never claimed to, like, get everything on the first go of a story. I don't think anybody does. I like people who, like, decide, like, I'm not a rereader. I don't like to read. Why would you read a book again when there's, like, millions of books to read? I'm just like, like I would rather read deeper than read wider.
Yeah,
So at the end, okay, what would you rate the book out of 5 stars?
Out of 5 stars, I would give it a 4 for me.
Yeah, I would give it a 4 as well. That's what I wrote down. I think it's one of those books, I think with a reread, it would potentially be even higher.
It's a very rich book. I feel like it sticks with you. And for me personally, that's the sign of a good book. Like, even just to think about it after you're done with it, I think is a sign that it's at least like a piece of art.
Right.
That's going to sort of impact you for better, for worse. And it's just like a more interactive dialogue between you and the book.
Right. I'm actually like, this was the last book of the year that I've read, and I'm so happy, like, to the point where I kind of made a note where every book I review this year, I want to give it a rating, and then at the end of the year, I want to go back to each one and have my rating at the end of the year. Because basically, like, one is my initial reaction, and then the other is like, how do I feel about this book a year later? I've never done that before, and I'm kind of excited to do that this year, and I don't think I would have done that if I hadn't read this book. Okay, we're done.
This is fun.
Yeah, this was 82 minutes long before we cut it.
We knew
I like how
it would be
we
long.
just rated a book 4 stars and we talked about it for an hour and a half.
Is that rare?
That's insane. I'm already kind of rolling my eyes that we're not saying this is a 5-star book. Like, I'm already in retrospect saying I think that it is, but yeah.
It probably is.
I'm already changing my mind.
Anne Patchett. So, finally got that one. It was apparently a hard one for me.
Dan Pratchett, the author of this book.
No, give her due. We
Okay.
love your book.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. This was really long. This was super fun. I'm so glad you did this.
So
We're
fun.
actually planning to maybe do another one in February when Jackie has a reading week during school. So
We'll see, yeah.
thanks for watching.
Bye, guys.
As always, my name is Rick, and I will talk to you guys in a couple days. Bye.
Bye.
Oh.